Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We're your hosts, Karan and Kristen. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today, we are talking with Simon Drew, a fellow Enlifted coach who lives across the seas over in the UK. Simon has started his pirate journey by realizing no one except himself was coming to save him and starting his rebellion from within. Simon rides the waves he encounters and has fun creating and developing ways to be better in all he does so he can deliver to his clients. And Simon, we're glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So yeah, you started telling us a little about your journey before hit record, and you've been acknowledging the rules, getting creative with them, and as I said in the intro too, like your journey has started from within. So we'd love for you to weave us a tale of your pirate journey, where you started, and what you've learned along the way.
Yeah, it's been a very long journey, and in many senses, I started rebelling as a child purely because there was a lot of discomfort in my family home, and my father was the bringer of the discomfort. So myself, my two brothers, two younger brothers, and especially my mum, my dad was very righteous in the way he related to the world, and he's a very simple man, and I've healed all of the relationship with him now. Which we could talk about a little bit later. However, at the time, it was very much that you felt shackled by the restrictions that he put on us in an emotional way as much as anything when we were living together as a family. And I guess the specific rebellion that was an absolute pivotal moment for me was when I was allowed to go to graphic design college, being good at art, and not be railroaded by my father into engineering, which was a solid profession that he'd been in for a couple of decades by this time. So for me, my mum supported me in that. However, all my friends did a lot of engineering as well. So a lot of friends went to what seemingly was stable local professions. And I had this dream of A, getting away from the home for the obvious reasons that you can imagine, and B, doing something that was much more creative and very exciting to me. And I didn't know what. I ended up moving to graphic design. That's what I did at college when I left school. And this is the choice that was made. But I didn't really know what that was. I just knew that it wasn't the railroaded sort of engineering street, tangent that and I was allowed and very privileged, felt very privileged at the time to be able to do this. So that was the start of my rebellion from the existing, if you like, ancestral process of learning to be a human, growing into a profession that was stable and solid, and all of the rational thinking that my father always brought to the table. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but of course I had other reasons to move away from home as well. So leaving the home and going to college in London, actually South London, at 18 after doing a 2-year course in Derby was certainly a huge change in my life, and that did literally direct the rest of my life in terms of how I progressed. Because I was away from home, meeting a whole range of other, if you like, artistic or creative people. And interestingly, from that point on, what became noticeable, especially in my relationships to women, my personal relationships, was that a lot of me was still, a lot of my upbringing was still inside of me, still running the show. And my relationship to myself was the biggest problem that became apparent in my mid-20s. So what I then began to do was begin to look to how I could heal. It wasn't that healing wasn't the word at the time, mid-20s, I was struggling dealing with having aggressive behaviors that would come out, and I didn't know why they were there. But of course, it was stored up energy from childhood. That was the basics of it, which I understood some of the therapeutic awareness of, childhood affects how you hide a lot of it. You're able to push it to the side. So I had an understanding of this. And at that point, when I was 24, because of this anger issue, and I was living with my girlfriend, who eventually became my wife at the time, I went to the first therapy sessions I'd ever had. So I did 8 weeks working with a therapist, literally writing down all of the stories from my childhood. And at the time, that had a positive effect. I definitely felt that I understood myself more. And as things progressed, my life was pretty much, it was a bit easier. I didn't get angry so much, for sure. I had a bit more of an ability to self-navigate my own emotions, more than I had done before, and life progressed. I eventually got married at 27 to my wife, funnily enough, to the lady I'd been in a relationship since I was 20, and what happened then was we progressed to having 2 children. My career, continued to improve. I continued to do well in my career. My wife's career improved for a few years, and then we had rather difficult financial position, whereby she was made. She had to make herself bankrupt, and money had always been a difficult thing for us, and the stress of life became more difficult. And it's interesting. When you get married, or even before you're married, and you're in what you believe is a committed relationship, I'd always related to being in a relationship as being a balance, in terms of, it's not going to be good all the time, and it's not going to be bad all the time. So it's kind of, you're riding a wave through the relationship and the issues you're dealing with in life. And it just seemed over time that it just became that there's so many things, so many parts of our relationship were out of whack, and it just felt more and more over the years, more and more uncomfortable. And another pivotal point for me was, I left my full-time job in 2000, when you guys were running around at at school or something. I might be being too polite there.
Yeah,
but
Oh, 2000?
No,
So
maybe
I'm
yes.
older than I look, right?
2011.
I
So
am
are
older.
we.
You girls hide it better than me, though. But yeah, so I left my full-time job because there was something about my life that I couldn't. I'd got 2 young children. There were 4 and 5, something like that, and I was offered redundancy, and I'd been involved in another self-development program at the time, because what happened when I started doing the therapy, I started doing quite a bit more reading in the background, self-development. I've always been trying to resolve stuff about myself that didn't feel comfortable. That's been my entire life, which is why when we come to the end of this part of the conversation, you're going to understand that the last few years have been a particular way for me, and it's why I'm very much here talking to you today. So I left this job because things felt just out of balance, and I needed to feel like I was expressing myself and doing something that felt real to me, that actually made a difference in the world. And making a difference was the statement that was the absolute thing that became important to me. And I'd been in effectively a corporate design job for 9 years at this time. It was a great job. I earned a good salary, and I had a unique position within the company, and I was a design director at the time as well. And so with all the background of how I was feeling, I knew I'd hit like a wall of feeling like I was in a machine, and I was not really involved on a humanistic level, or a human relationship connective level with the people I was working for. Just felt like part of a machine. The money became irrelevant to me because I just was not fulfilled in what I was doing. So it was quite a rebellion for me to walk out of a full-time job earning more money than I earn now, by the way, right now, at this very moment. And this is 22 years ago. And so it was a real leap of faith, and it caused a lot of uncomfortableness in the following years, because it was very difficult for me to then move on to a different profession. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to change something, and I was prepared to risk, if you like, almost everything. Um, and So it was a very challenging several years, until it was about 5 years, in fact. I started taking my children to initially to judo, and then to karate, and it became apparent to me that I might as well join in, because I'm sat around watching them, and it's a 20-minute drive each way. So I might as well not drive home for 20 minutes to sit and do whatever and then turn around and come back again. So I might as well join in. So I started doing karate with them. And that led to me getting a lot fitter, getting really good at something and really inspired by something. That led me to really re-engage with my love of fitness, which I'd had when I was a teenager. I was really into sort of bodybuilding at the time with a good friend, and we used to train 3 or 4 times a week, and we got very strong when I was between 14 and 16. So re-engaging with that, feeling and using my body, feeling healthy after several years of bringing up children and eating all the leftovers, uh, which does happen. I started to use my body, and essentially what happened then was I broke a hand in a tournament, um, and within 2 years, I decided to give up because I kept re-breaking the hand in sparring, and that's what you need to do when you're in karate. You have to spar, so you have to hit things. And I found CrossFit, and that I fell in love with straight away, because I love working really hard. I love going really fast doing stuff, and I love having a rest while your partner does something, and then you can wait and all that kind of thing. So I absolutely fell in love with a variety of using my body almost on a competitive level as well, which was really the thing that caught me about that. Was I remember my brother introduced me to him and his friend, and we decided to do a workout called the Filthy 50. I think it was on the 28th of December 2009, I think it was. I actually pretty much remember when it was. Went in the back garden, did it in like 50 minutes or something ridiculous, with the best I could do with the equipment I had in the garden. And you could go online and tap in what you'd done, how long it took, how horrible it was, and there was a real connection, even though at that time it was via Facebook messaging at the time, and I fell in love with it straight away, and I switched my fitness stuff to that, and then I realized that there was a very relatively straightforward way of becoming a CrossFit coach. And about 18 months later, I took my level 1. And on the back of that, I decided to really go for opening up my own business again in fitness, and really engaging with and getting connected with people. And it had always been, for me, was the mental aspect of the fitness part. What you feel like moving your body, how you learn things moving your body, how you learn about yourself, and how you react to different situations, and the difficulty of certain things and less so for others. So it was all about, for me, very much about the mental part of that. And that's really why now, having done 10 years in fitness, which was celebrated earlier this year, and being a local individual rebel in fitness, because I make people do things they don't really want to do, whereas most of the other coaches around here, very, quite regular personal trainers or gym environments, where there's the pretty much the standard vision, kind of view of what a gym is. Mostly there are some CrossFit gyms around, but they're a bit few and far between locally, because I'm in the countryside quite a bit, really. But I felt very different to everybody else, which is that, if you like, that's the rebellious part of me. I'm sailing my own ship, and everybody else is going that way. I've always tried to stay. I'm not into mainstream. That's basically what goes on with me. So I actively go rebellious when somebody says, "Oh, well, everybody's doing this." No, they're not all doing that. And I know that sounds very kind of trivial in a way, but that's the way my brain has worked since I was a kid. in that I never follow the flow of the way that everybody perceives it's going, supposedly, when there's so many other options. And then bringing it full circle to the most recent work with Enlifted and being in this community, I've, with the help of Mark through level 1 and level 2, beginning to really see where my value is and what I can contribute fully to people, and what I can help them just reveal about themselves now in a very simple way, which, we as guys know how simple it is to do some of the coaching style that is within this group, and bring my own take on different situations. And my own journey has been a big part of me learning how to overcome all of that past and that prescriptive version of my life that was in my brain for a long time. And the way I relate to bless you.
Thank you.
The way I relate to the new realm of coaching that I'm now developing with a business mentor is that I'm looking for people who are suffering and require healing at the same kind of level I have. Because at the end of the day, I've been in a journey of self-healing. I didn't realize it until like 2 or 3 years ago. Healing was the word, but it's about reigniting the fire within and healing yourself fully in order to then have the energy and the drive to really fulfill whatever you choose to fulfill on in your life. And there are so many people in the modern world who are, suppressed behind feeling like they have to be a particular way or feeling like they've got no way out. And so that's the journey forward from here, which, if you like, is an act of helping others to rebel from the programming and the way their lives have been set before them. So I think I did quite well to keep that relatively short. I don't know. You might think of it.
That's perfect. Well, a couple of things came to mind, like with the whole idea behind Be More Pirate, which was introduced to us by Mark England, where that inner rebellion starts. Like, it's the first step in your pirate journey, because the hardest rules to break are your own. So helping people get on their pirate journey through that. I was curious because we all did the Enlifted Ancestry course together, where on top of the Enlifted work that we've learned with like our stories from mom and dad, as well as now really ancestrally. You mentioned back when you were in your 20s, the writing down your stories from childhood, and it helped. I'm wondering about the difference you noticed between, well, first, what you noticed when you were writing down those stories when you were younger, and then how that is different from the work that you've done these last few years with Enlifted and the ancestry work.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a long time ago. It's 32 years ago when I wrote these stories down initially. And I'll be honest with you, what struck me when I was first asked to write them down as well, I never write anything down. Feels like homework. Do you know what I mean? It feels like, I kind of get it, but I don't really get it, because I don't really want to write stuff down. I'm used to drawing pretty pictures now with my work. I don't want to write stuff down. And I remember it being somewhat cathartic in the process of just writing it down. I also remember that it gave me a level of perspective in writing it down that I'd not had while it was in my head. And I honestly don't think that I was working with a female psychologist. I can't remember her name. But I honestly don't think that there were some gentle questions asked about what I'd written, if you like, very softly spoken questions. How did you feel about him at this point? How, and over and above that, nothing else happened. And so there was an advantage and useful, utility in writing down the stories. I felt better seeing the words in front of me than I did with them rattling around in my head. And beyond that, there was a little bit of query and a bit of maybe new insight on a couple of angles, but there wasn't much else to it. And of course, now, what I also remember is that there would be a full page and a half or 2 pages about. There would be more detail in the stories than the more recent stories I've written down, because there was not a request, well, not because, but I was just asked to write about the stories that I could remember.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no prescription on write down the event, where you were, what can you remember about the room, what was the time of year, what maybe some details that would bring in that kind of level of real clarity. It was more about a generalized kind of theme, and then somebody said something, and maybe a bit about my feelings, which obviously are the more of the detail that we do put in the stories that we work on and the way we relate to them. But I remember it being more like I was writing a story from being somebody else, if that sounds. So it's like me writing about myself, but almost like a part of me wasn't there. Does that make sense? Whereas I know now, if something comes up for me, and it very rarely does now, because most of my past is dealt with as far as I'm concerned. It The stories are like 4 lines long. I was outside, da 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 da. This man came over, da da. He was wearing this. It was a sunny day, and I felt like da 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 da. He said da 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 da, and I did da 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 da. And since then, I felt da 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 da. And it's simple, concise, and that we know how to relate to process that short story with a much more effective technique. And so, to answer the question, one felt fluffy and soft and had a little bit of insight. The other one feels very concise and powerful, because I can see and work on it in a particular way that's very action orientated and can actually change my perception of myself and my perception of other people or other events or other situations. So it's super powerful now. It was fluffy and soft and helped a little bit before.
Yeah. We've got my ninja back here that asks, where do you feel that emotion in your body? So you needed this ninja back when you're
yeah, exactly. And yeah, to bring that's a perfect point and example there. There was never any thought on. There was never. I remember being in a slopey chair in this office when I was talking in this therapy room with the psychologist. A kind of slopey, uncomfortable chair where you didn't feel like you're particularly engaged in the chair, and there was never any reference to how you're breathing, because this was way before breathing. Breathing wasn't invented at 35 years ago.
You didn't breathe.
But yeah, those kind of what we call key questions now about relating to the sensations in your body, which we know are very pertinent now to the relationship we have with the words we're talking about and the stories we're talking about. None of that was relevant. It just wasn't talked about. Yeah, so things have moved on in a very positive way. And the thing is, I've had to wait. I've had to wait for this tech, which has really probably been around 10, 15 years, this new approach to getting into people's memories and de-traumatizing. I call it de-traumatizing the trauma, because they are small traumas that we've had as we've grown up. And that's why I remember it, because it has some sort of negative relationship or sensation in our body. It's linked to the sensations and whatever story you may have to them. So yeah. Your ninjas are amazing, by the way. I finally, and this is going to sound a bit rude in a way, but I've been right behind your book. But I finally, one of my customers bought it, and I borrowed it the other week, and I read the whole thing, and I was super impressed with that, because started reading it, and I thought, oh, this seems like it's not that focused on the words so much, and then got sort of 2/3 way through, and then suddenly the incisiveness of what you're doing becomes really relevant and becomes super powerful in the last few pages. And I thought it was it's really well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really was well done. And I'm looking for, I haven't looked at the second one yet, your new one, but yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks.
Am I old enough?
So we touched before, you talked about like your social rebellion and the work that you're doing now, but I wanted to dig a little bit more into that. And what is that social rebellion that you're creating with your work?
So I believe my social rebellion is very personal to me insofar as well, certainly insofar as all my clients now are held to account on the words they use generally. Um, and I think that's an act of social rebellion, arguably because when people speak, they speak without consciousness very often. And I think to highlight that they can speak more powerfully or use their words much more effectively, shall we say, um, with the people I work with is a way of reminding them that's available. And most people don't do that. Most people live a life whereby they just let people be who they are. And don't get me wrong, I don't annoy people all the time with this. But if we're talking about something that's relevant to the work I do with them or around their health and wellness, I'll generally hold them to account and actually hold them up with that. And what I love about that is as well, it's a gentle reminder to yourself to hold yourself to account all the time, of course, and that so you that teaching others is actually helping you as much as anybody else. So, and my new projects the new work stream I'm developing, and it's still in a very early inception stage. I'm working on the marketing of it really at the moment to make sure that it's actually marketable in a way that works. Is going to be taking people of middle age, I would say that's probably the likely market, people who've had enough discomfort to know that there's something that needs to be worked on. And to me, that's it's going under the radar, improving one person at a time so that the world becomes a better place. And ultimately that's a form of social rebellion, I would say. I know that's a slightly loose. I'm not projecting myself out or everywhere and telling people what to do. And we're going to march on London and, burn Parliament or whatever it might be.
November 5 has passed.
Yeah, exactly. I'm over that now. But to me, I know my whole life has felt like a rebellion against the cards I was dealt. And I believe that every person I interact with has that potential. And so I do my best to help them themselves, have that power within to do that for themselves. That's really who I am with that. So I see I see the work that I do as literally I'm working with one person at a time. One person is good enough right now. One person is going to be completely transformed soon, and we know that this work we do to heal ourselves brings the light of the world to the fore, as opposed to the darkness and the upset and the reactionary stuff that's out in the world predominantly right now. There's a lot of that stuff going on right now. There's a lot of you left and right, black and white, and people divisive, and lots of friction, shall we say, whereas we're looking to create contentment and ease and allow people to generate something that is very valuable to the world. And so I believe that's my social rebellion, is being a person that is generating that in the world.
That, speaking of not going to Parliament and burning it, although since November 5, it was just November 5. So is that why that's on
Have you heard
mind?
the politics situation over here? It's been diabolical recently.
It's been interesting to, I mean, as a Canadian, I mean, I'm watching across the seas. I'm watching down south. There's just so much going on, and I'm thankful.
The world is going crazy in the politics area for sure. And it must be some of the most difficult times in the modern era. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, burning Parliament would be trouble.
Not good trouble.
Illegal trouble. No. So with good trouble, like we told you, we like to talk about good trouble. What when you hear that phrase, what does that mean to you? And then you talked a little bit about what you are doing to create good trouble, but is there anything else too that you'd like to add?
Yeah, what good trouble? Um, it's something that I do without thinking about it. I think in many ways, as I say, I'm quite rebellious, and I'll often do things that seem odd to other people. That's my perception of myself anyway. I may be more regular and more straight than I'm suggesting, but um, the basic concept of good trouble to me is if you come into a situation where there are specific rules, if the rules feel like they are so restrictive that the organization, that the situation can easily be benefited from and actually grow, develop, be more fulfilled, then I'll banish the rules and break the rules and suggest we change the rules. Um, I'm trying to think of some good examples. My work is definitely an area where I do it consistently because my work is, so for instance, I don't program both my group sessions and my individual sessions ahead of time. I do them I do one, then I do another. Then I don't, because I like to stay creative and I like to change in relationship to who's coming to some of the sessions, what the environment's going to be like, what the weather's going to be like, because a lot of my boot camp sessions, my group sessions are outdoors predominantly, so I deal with the weather quite a bit. And I like people to, part of my group sessions is about making people uncomfortable, which means I'm often buffering up against causing good trouble. In my world, it's good trouble. In their world, it's, oh really? But I know it's good for them. And I know this is probably sounds a little bit low key and flippant in some ways, but if you like, I'm an antagonist in my sessions, the group sessions. And certainly in the new stuff I'm going to be doing as well. As I say, my own good trouble has been causing myself discomfort, and I know again that's very inward for me, right? However, to grow, you need to be uncomfortable. So anything where you can make yourself uncomfortable is a good trouble, because it is going to be good for you, despite the fact it may feel uncomfortable. And you are definitely going to grow from the discomfort, and that's one thing for me is a big thing. If you're too, and this is if you like, the problem with a whole range of other problems underneath it with the modern world is we can be much too comfortable. And so people don't have enough micro level good troubles to disrupt them from their comfortable lifestyle. I'm waffling on here about this. I don't do a lot of massive good trouble stuff. I haven't put a flag on a building anywhere and all climbed up it and gone.
You've got your own flag.
Stuff. But I say my rebellion is mostly internal for me. But I believe what I do. I don't perceive I have a regular profession. I think my profession in terms of health and fitness is much more irregular than most other coaches. And I like it like that because I enjoy that difference of having that alternative view of health and fitness with people and well-being as well. And certain practices within the health and fitness domain that many people are, kind of follow. I downplay some and I highlight others. So I'm a huge advocate for making sure you get enough sleep and drink enough water, but I'm not a massive nutrition approach fan, because I think you can do a certain amount of basics and let the person enjoy the food they enjoy, as long as they keep the basics under control. They know when they're having certain foods that are less desirable. They know when they're predominantly eating good food or things that are going to be healthy for them. I'm not very prescriptive on those areas because I again, myself, it's not something I know I follow. And it's not that I can't coach that stuff. It's just that I think it's more valuable for them to get out in the fresh air, sleep well, drink enough water, and get basic nutrition in place. So again, I could waffle on about all this kind of stuff, but there are, there are things that I enjoy doing, and I perceive the way I relate to my own clients around health and wellness, and how I coach them. I'm a bit on it. I'm on the edge of normal.
Oh, I was waiting. Karan, are you okay? It looked like you were going to
Sorry
say
if I'm
something.
not
I was
answering
ready
these
for you.
questions very well. Just say you're
Oh,
really
no.
bad at answering, Simon.
No,
I was trying to
I'm
figure out if Karan was going to say something.
I'm not having a Wi-Fi Wednesday. I'm having a microphone Wednesday. So it keeps telling me that I'm not found. So
You're not found.
not
But
found.
you're here.
I'm here now. Currently, microphone
We know where Karan
found.
is. Microphone.
Yes. I've lost my voice.
Oh no.
So where? Go ahead.
Oh, I was like, oh, you're talking now. We're real good right now.
Yeah.
These are the parts that I also leave in. So. Well, I do want to ask, like, you were pretty open through the time of doing Enlifted Ancestry about how digging into that ancestral work and the stories there has changed and helped your relationship with your kids. So would you be willing to talk a little bit about how doing that inner work and figuring out like, and it's helped your relationship with your dad too, right?
Yeah. The thing is, I'm not seen my dad much this year. Actually, since I visited him, I think it was maybe April, May time, post the ancestral course earlier in the year. I had a great day up there with him. I've always been the last several years. There's a whole story around how I interacted with my dad and my relationship with my dad. Around how my mum left my dad, all that stuff, happened when I was around 20. And the 22 years ago, when I did my first major self-development piece, then when I eventually then left my job, which I mentioned earlier, that's around the time when I also reconnected with my dad. At that point, I forgave him. However, more recently, over the last several years, as I've been changing, as I've grown and developed as a person in numerous other ways as well, which we haven't discussed yet, what I noticed was I've become much more open about what I've been experiencing. So I arguably had to lecture him, but my dad's a very simple man, so he would be listening and sitting there and smiling very politely, but wouldn't have much more back to say back to me, and that used to really frustrate me, and that has completely gone now. And the reason it's gone was the ancestral course gave me the opportunity to mindfully do a Q&A with him for like a couple of hours. The same as I did exactly the same with my mum, and they filled in a lot of gaps in relationship to themselves, their parents, and any other earlier or uncles, aunts, ancestral stuff in terms of our family lineage was filled in. And what came about and became super apparent, having done the whole healing process with myself for the previous 2 years up until earlier this year, was how apparent it was that you could see a chain of events whereby a person had a life that was like this, therefore they raised children like this, and therefore they raised children like this, and then my dad appeared, and then I appeared. And even the simple fact that I remember when I was growing up, my grandma, my dad's mum, I remember during that process of going through an ancestral course how funny and quirky she was, but also I remember my mum's quite, if you like, the more scholastic, learned one of my two parents. And so we'd always often joke about how my grandma was a little bit dim. She'd do silly things or forget things or not be able to play cards in a particular game or whatever it would be. And my dad, and it never occurred to me until I did this question, the interview with my dad, is he's a very, very simple man. And because he'd worked in an engineering environment, I had him on a much more cerebral, elevated position in my mind or my whole life. And it really hadn't connected and until I interviewed him. He literally said it. He hadn't really get any other opportunities. He never really wanted to do anything particular with his life apart from just earn a wage, be able to go out to the pub in the evening and the weekends, pay for the family, and that was it. So he had no aspirations at all, particularly, whereas my mum did and was much more, cerebral, shall we say. Um, and what that allowed me to do through understanding that, through understanding his ancestry and the very simple and very straightforward way he's lived his life, his whole life, I was able to put my own expectations out of the way and just see him for who he actually is. Just let him be this loving, caring man who, yes, has had certain issues that caused aggravation and upset when I was growing up, but he was just an upset. He was basically like an upset child when I was growing up. And now I can see that was what was happening, and I can just let it be. It's behind me. It's behind all of us, and he's just a caring, simple man, and he's my dad. And when I got all of that story, if you like, about my expectations, what he'd been like, out of the way, it just allows me to be completely content, and him just to be himself, and there be no friction at all. Not that I deemed there was any for several years, really, but it really just went. There was just peace and calm and tranquility. And of course, in seeing that for myself, my relation to my dad, I know the parent I've been, I know the parent my wife was to our children, and it really elevated my connection with my children because of the same sensationary kind of interaction of parent and child. So it was a lot easier for me to forgive myself for the things I felt a little bit of, if you like, regret about being as a parent. The fact that I'm the one that caused my marriage to separate, my children's parents to be separated. And the simple fact about that is I wanted my wife to be happy. I knew we weren't happy, and I knew I needed to move. I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't be there anymore because bad things would have happened for me. I just saw the darkness. I just couldn't see anything good coming out of it. And much similar kind of feeling to when I left the career in graphic design, because it felt like if I stayed there, I'd got no reason for living, even though I clearly had children at the time, and I had other reasons to live in. But when you're sat at work doing something that feels completely meaningless, it's so degrading, and you feel so powerless to change anything. I had to just change it, and that's what I did. So it was I found the ancestral course really steady and gentle, and with some highlights where wow, that was super powerful. And it was just as we finished the course, it was like, everything's so simple. So I've had a slightly, I say slightly, it's a few years ago now, there's a fair amount more friction between me and my son. And so now my son and my daughter, my daughter's been my best friend for the last several years. She's been so supportive to me as somebody I can rely on to talk about some of the stuff I've been working through, because I needed somebody close to me, and she happened to be the person that I managed to use to talk to about these things. And she, we're very close on that stuff. And but my relationship to my son now is beautiful. That I have beautiful relationships with both my kids, and so it's the full package. It's been enlightening in so many ways. And the wonderful thing as well is now I understand the history of my grandparents more, their grandparents, and you can see how life was difficult, and how it was a different world 50, 60, 100 years ago. And there's something truly fascinating and wonderful about being 2 or 3 generations away, and also having so different a life. To see how the world has changed massively in that time has been, just to put, your own version of how that's become apparent, that very big difference in how we live and how they lived. And also the discomfort of some of the stories was, from my past, clearly hugely traumatic situations for people. And it just, that part of it is energized the work I'm doing with the people I coach now. And so, yeah. And it gives you a whole new view of another person's life as well, because all of that is accessible to everybody we ever meet. We've all come from nothing billions of years ago, and we're all here by the magic of the universe and energy and light and nature and whatever you want to call it. And we are amazingly here, alive and well. And so we've all very much been on that ancestral journey, and for millennia, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the cool things about that program that I noticed was learning more about my ancestors. So say, you have your father, but then learning about your grandmother and like maybe her mother and so on, just really gave me such a better empathy for my father, for where he came from, and then for my grandmother and where she came from. And I think that's it's something that's just missing in the world, the greater world, is just having that ability to humanize people. And so we can have that empathy for them. So like we have this view of our parents of what they should be in our head, but the reality is they're humans and they've had their own traumas.
Absolutely,
Being able to have that empathy for other people is a game changer, really.
yeah. One of the one of the big stories, I say one of the major stories in my dad's ancestral line is his dad's dad was an alcoholic, and he beat his mum, his granddad, my granddad's mum. And there's a couple of stories my dad remembers about that, and one that his dad told him, and about an interaction with this drunken husband, the drunken dad, and my granddad's mum had something like 10 or 12 children, and I think she lost 2 or 3, and my granddad was the youngest, and he's the one that eventually held the line with his dad. And so all these things, you think, my God, 10 children. Yes, there are families that still have 10 children, but also they were living in a poverty situation where this guy, who he actually drank a lot, he'd go out and drink all the earnings for the week's wages from working in the mines, which is what he did. And so you got 10 children plus 2 parents who've got no money for food for the week, and you can, it's a very different world. And so yeah, it gives you context, because that's got those people got you here now, but your life is so different, and we have a context of my dad was a horrible to me, whatever, but it's a completely different version of existence to what 2 generations before had. And it's both fascinating and eye-opening, and so powerful to really ground you in being and having a successful life right now, because you get how privileged you are, and you get that you've not got much to really worry about. On a level that's really deep and powerful, because we live in comparative comfort. I mean, look at us, we're actually all indoors.
Yeah.
From the elements.
With talking on computers.
With internet
exactly.
that mostly works.
With a wire that's very thin, but just about handles the data.
Yeah, there's a lot with that ancestral stuff. Like for me, a big thing that came up too was my great grandpa not being able to say that he was proud to his kids. And then that passed down. And then like my mom and said, sometimes I love you. I remember her saying it to me when I was in kindergarten, when I left to go to school. But then I have a huge chunk of my life until I went off to college where I don't really remember it being said that often. And if I ever heard that my mom was proud of me, I don't think I heard it from her, but maybe I was just blocked to hearing it from her. But I would hear it secondhand, like, oh, yeah, I was talking with your mom and she's so proud of what you're doing. I'm like, why is she telling you that and not me?
Yeah.
So yeah, being able
Just
to.
reminded me of something there, Kirsten. It
Yep.
reminded me of the key story about the story. This is the story of my dad's life. I'm gonna tell you a little story about my dad. It's a story that he related to, and to me it was like, I understand now why you were the way you were as my father. So when he was 5 years old, his mum, my grandma, was either just had or just about to give birth to a younger brother, to my dad. And my dad's in the back garden, jumping for joy at the fact that I've got a brother. He's really super excited. His auntie walks through the back gate into the garden and proceeds to say, "Stop being so excited," and she slaps him across the face. And then later on that day, or whenever his mum found out about it, he was very pleased to declare that his mum told his auntie off. Now, my dad, much like you've declared about your mum, my dad never gave me any praise. Very, very rarely had anything worthy to say to back up anything we did, and he very rarely would glorify or praise us for anything. And he also has a very limited vocabulary when it comes to even things like writing a card. So all you ever get is all the best. You never get lots of love, have a great Christmas, see you in the new year. It's always all the best, Dad, and maybe a kiss if it's, for my daughter or whoever else. And I could really reflect on that in the so far as my dad is emotionally closed off. And I actually believe that event when he was 5 years old got him to shut down his emotions, because he realized that on some level, he realized if you release your emotions and show how you're feeling, you're going to get slapped. And there was one other event as well later on, which backed the fact he'd done this. He was very, very proud that at work he'd twice signed the Official Secrets Act and never told anybody. And also that when he was growing up, I think it was when he was about 9 years old, I think he said, his dad got the new house plans out for the house they were having built. And when it was laid out on the table, my dad happened to be in there because he was the eldest, and all the kids were out playing out. They weren't conscious to what was going on. But he was told don't tell anybody that the house is coming. Don't mention it to anybody. And he was felt very proud to not share information with other people, which to me just embodies this person who can't be emotive and is shut down in terms of communication. So that's who my dad was. And that had been set in stone pretty much from 9 years old. And I didn't know that. So to learn that when I interviewed him was just like, and it just helps you really understand, why that person is that way and be completely at peace with it. That's what he was dealt. That's how he reacted. And it just said it all to me about who he was. I wanted to share that with you because it felt very relevant from what you said. So
yeah, and that's so powerful, being able to look at the people that raised us and be like, you're human too.
And take away that, my whole upbringing was this judgmental, scared. We were just scared of him, frightened to death of his reaction, because we never knew if he was going to be kind of more happy or just be laughed and more less stressed, shall we put it, and then or just be ranting and huffling and just like you feel like you're in the way, and he just is really annoyed all the time, which felt like most of the time. And understanding and having empathy for him being that person, being in that situation is being a parent. So
yeah.
So where can our listeners go and find out more about you and what you're up to?
Ooh, good question. So at the moment, the truth is that I had my Instagram account hacked earlier this year. So I have a new Instagram account. Those damn Bitcoiners from Nigeria, I believe. I did find out that's where they're from. Um, so I'm not currently really promoting much, but I am on Instagram at the underscore authentic underscore Simon underscore Drew. There's only a few posts on there because it's really I'm not really focusing on business at all and promoting anything, as I'm really in the process of initializing and re-engaging with how to progress my group sessions, my personal training, if at all. That's probably going to say pretty much the same, but then this new stuff. So I'm working on really the nuts and bolts even before I actually design the programs and things I'm going to deliver to people. I'm working on the real business end, and I mean that in the real specifics of how I'm going to be marketing it. So you can find me on Instagram. You can find me at if you look up Saffron Bootcamp on Facebook. That'd be relevant for people who are local to me. You can get in touch via email. I'm trying to think of how else do I get in touch with people. I'm on Facebook with Simon Drew, and as I say, I'm not promoting anything as yet. By the time this goes out, depending on the timing of it, it may be that I'll have something relevant to share in terms of links and things. So yeah, that's where I am right now. There will be a new website, very likely, with which will be the access to getting a conversation with me about the new all-encompassing. So one of the I'll share. There's one toy name for it. It's LFT, Life Fulfillment Therapy. So I've gone with the word therapy purely because it just gives it that sense that life fulfillment takes work. So there's some figuring out to do. So there's some internal and external things to deal with, and mostly it's to do with the internal initially, to figure out how to be fulfilled, and then how to flourish and make life fulfilling, in a total sense. As I say, it's early stages yet, and it may well be called something different, but that gives you an idea of the kind of holistic overall approach that I'll be taking with the coaching on that. So yeah, that's where I am. What else can I share?
Well, so we have
my jokes now.
Yeah, well, first, before your joke, because you did come prepared with a joke too, actually. How would you recommend our listeners go about starting their own pirate journey?
I think if you were to consider starting a pirate journey, you're looking to be rebellious on some level. So figure out, you'll know what it is as well. What are the most uncomfortable parts of your life? What is it about them? If you can figure out what is it about, why are you uncomfortable about them? Figure out what micro changes you could perhaps make very small changes. They don't have to be that big to have quite a big effect. And that's how I would say to begin. And you can play with this. Is the thing to do, is make sure you're playing. Like, play with trying different things. There are no hard rules generally in life. You may have if you have a particular kind of job, there'll be hard and fast rules in some areas, no doubt. However, be fun and creative and play with fiddling around with some of the rules or how you do a particular thing. Cross the road further down instead of going. Try something new. If you're bored, I mean, bored is one of my pet hates with people, because there's so much to learn and grow with out in the world, and especially with yourself, of course, at the start. But I'm never bored because there's always something to do. There's always something interesting to read, learn, podcasts to listen to, things you can relate to in your own life to write about and think about and consider. So yeah, I'd start small. However, if there is a big issue that you're really triggered by and feel like you really want to make a difference with it, talk to some friends, see if you can create something. You may not need friends. You may be able to do something yourself. It might be raising some charity money for a particular thing that's really triggering you or bothering you, or you feel like you can really contribute. Plant a tree somewhere in the middle of nowhere. do something that's useful. That's a great thing to do. Yeah, so I'd start small, but if there's something really that bothers you, go for it. Just figure out how you can make a difference. Making a difference, making the world better, making yourself better. They're all small acts of rebellion in a way, because you're very likely buffering up against something that's been normalized in a particular way, and you can change the rules and do something very simple very often.
Yeah. Well, and that's great. And now we're ready for your jokes.
Here we go. Two slightly different ones here. We'll start with the one that I'm slightly less happy with, but we'll go with this one. To err is human. To R is to pirate. Some say that's very philosophical, right? And then the next one is a question for you. Why is pirating so addictive?
I don't know.
They say once you lose your first hand, you're hooked.
We haven't had
I
that
know,
one.
it's just a little bit.
They're so great.
A bit wordy,
So
that
cheesy.
one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for telling us, sharing your pirate journey with us. We've enjoyed having you today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's really fun to chat, and thanks for spending so much time. We've run over an hour. I thought we would. I told you I can't stop chatting. We've got the pirate flag here, my one. That's in the photo that you might see on this podcast. Hopefully you've seen it. Yeah, I think maybe come back in 18 months and I'll have a very different story to tell you. So thank you for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. And it's lovely to talk to you directly, which is the first time we've done so. So it's fantastic. Yeah. I'll hopefully see you in Austin, Texas next year, or maybe I'll come and visit you guys on the West Coast a bit further over.
The West Coast is gonna feel a lot like home to you, but also it's great out here.
Yeah. You're further north, aren't you? You're in very green area.
Which
is that
one?
right?
Both of us, yes.
You're both further north.
Yeah. Karan's more north than me, but
all right. Because you're Canada, aren't you? Of course. Yeah. Wow. Is it getting cold there yet? Yeah. It's still quite mild here, but it's been very wet recently. Anyway, I'll let people go. You want to press the buttons.
Well,
so nice to talk to you, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thanks.